Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to PhotoBiz Live. This is Andy from the PhotoBiz team, and today we are joined by Brett Jarnagin for a webinar about retouching in Lightroom. Today, you're going to learn from Brett how to retouch your images in Lightroom so you can achieve balanced images, flawless skin, and more effects that are going to speed up your workflow and polish your images. In addition to getting the opportunity to learn from Brett in today's webinar, we will also have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. You may submit your questions using the chat tool, and we will answer them after the presentation. Just a reminder, you can submit your questions at any point during the webinar. You do not have to wait until the end. You can also just join in the discussion on Twitter by using the hashtag PhotoBizLive. Please pay attention to your chat window today, as Brett will be sharing some links with you, and so we want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to see those. If at any point during today's webinar you have any difficulty hearing the speaker or seeing the slides, please use the comment box to let us know. We will also be recording this webinar, and it will be available for replay on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/photobiz. With that being said, I'll turn things over to Brett.
Hey Andy, thanks for that introduction. That was lovely. And hello everybody, welcome to my first ever webinar. I'm really excited to be doing it with PhotoBiz. They're just a really awesome group of people. I've had the opportunity to hang out with them at many a trade show with live camera actions and have many a drink at places like Vegas and New Orleans. And they're just really incredible people who are really passionate about what they're doing, and that passion really shines through in all their products. And at their core, they really just want to help photographers succeed. By the way, they're not paying me anything to say this. I just really want to say that and thank them for the opportunity to be here and to talk to you guys. So a little bit about me. I started my photography business when I was 19. I took all my money and I bought my first DSLR, and with that camera came a copy of Photoshop Elements 2.0, which is a really, really basic and primitive program, but I didn't have any more money, so I had to work with that. And what was really good about being forced to use that is that it made me understand each and every little aspect of that program so I could manipulate it to get my photos to look the way I wanted them to. So then when I got Photoshop, it was like the floodgates opened, because I had this new really robust system to work with, and I started making actions for myself. That later became Life Camera Actions, which I launched at WPPI in 2010 and has been downloaded all over the world, and hopefully a lot of you guys are here from that. But from the start of that, I've had people pestering me to start making Lightroom presets, and so I've quietly been working on mastering that system the same way I did Elements in Photoshop, and understanding how to tweak that system to get the best results. So that's what I'm going to be sharing with you guys today, my tips and tricks for working in Lightroom. We're going to go over some really basic stuff, because a lot of you have messaged me and said you're tuning in and you're brand new to Lightroom. So we'll start with basics, and from there we're going to work our way up to more advanced things. Excuse me, I had to get a drink, wet my whistle. I've taught workshops all over the world, but I'm actually more nervous about this because I'm talking to a completely faceless audience, and I have no visual input or audio feedback for anything I'm saying. So if you're laughing at home, please laugh really, really loud, and maybe I'll hear it. Crickets. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Lightroom and what it is if you're brand new. It's used to organize and edit your images. If you're shooting in RAW, you're going to have to use Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw or something to process those images. So it's got fewer options than Photoshop, but the workflow is much faster. You can process more images at a time, and the price tag is much smaller than Photoshop. So for a long time, I kind of talked crap about Lightroom, but since I had so many people pester me about getting into Lightroom, I really have, and I've got to say most of my workflow at this point is in Lightroom. So before we talk about Lightroom, we need to talk about RAW versus JPEG. This is really basic. If you're a photographer and you've been around the block, you've heard this conversation a million times. If you're bored, feel free to throw tomatoes at your screen. So RAW files are uncompressed and lossless. All their captured data is preserved. And what that means is we have more to work with in a program like Lightroom when we're editing the exposure and the contrast and all those things because they're preserved. With JPEGs, your computer is or your camera is saying this is the final version of this, and it kind of smacks it down, compresses the data, and there's less to work with. So it's not to say you can't shoot with JPEG, because my friend Blair Phillips has won, national awards, and he's an incredible photographer. He shoots all JPEG. But most photographers prefer RAW because there's just more data to work with, and it allows you to maybe miss a shot by a little bit more than you can with JPEG and make those bigger adjustments to get it looking the way you want. So for the best results, pay attention. Again, we're not even talking about Lightroom yet. We're talking about in your camera. Because so many of these things you're going to see in Lightroom that we're adjusting could have been fixed by just doing it right in the camera. It's going to save you a lot of time. The fewer adjustments you make in Lightroom, the better quality photos you're going to have. And again, the fewer adjustments, the less time you're spending adjusting every little detail. So I would recommend crafting your images instead of just spray and pray. I teach a lot of workshops. I've mentored a lot of photographers. And what I consistently see is people taking pictures really, really rapidly, and then they look at the back of the camera and they're like, well, that doesn't work. And then they take some more pictures and they look at the back of the camera. Well, I don't like this. Maybe we'll go to another place and it'll get better. Stop. Just stop. Let me get in on this microphone. Just stop for a second and look at this shot on the back of your camera and analyze what's good about it and what's bad about it. So what's good and how can you repeat that moving forward, and what's wrong with the image and how can you adjust it in that moment to make the shot better. So I teach a lot of flash, and people constantly do this where they take a shot, they look at it, it doesn't work, they take it again, they keep doing the same thing. What's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So just take your time, analyze your shots, and craft those images. And also use a reflector. That's another huge thing that I see natural light photographers not doing, and it can be a really big stumbling block. Reflectors are going to bounce light up into the eyes. They're going to balance out the light, especially if you're shooting in open shade. If you ever get those raccoon eyes on your subject, you need a reflector in that situation. I think it's probably the most underutilized tool as a photographer for most photographers. And the people that you guys look up to and admire their work, I guarantee you they're all using reflectors. So one other thing about your sessions and your shooting, I've got an 80-20 rule, and I think this is what has got me to the level of photographer that I am. And that's that from the very start, I spent 80% of my session doing the things that I know would work. That way I know I have the shots, this stuff works, it's good to go, I can work through it bang, 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 and get the most great images in the least amount of time. But I would also spend 20% of my time trying new things. So I'd just go out and experiment. Maybe I'd have an idea that I had come up with or found online or something I wanted to try out. And I'd spend 20% of my time just doing those crazy things. And my favorite images would always come from the very end, those last 20% of my session. Those are the images I would love, and then I'd add those to my bag of tricks, and then I'd be able to do those the next time. So that's just some tips. I'm sorry that's not Lightroom, but we're getting into it right now. So the first thing we're going to talk about is also really basic, but that's importing your photos into Lightroom. So if you're working along with us, we're going to go to Library right up here. If you can see my mouse, it's right here. So let's see. We'll go down here. You can click Import, or you can go to File and Import Photos and Video. And if I mute this for a minute, it means I'm coughing. I'm getting over a cold, so 1 second. And we're back. I'm actually not going to import anything because I had an issue earlier with all my slides changing the order. So it's really simple. It's self-explanatory. But once we've imported, I'm going to bring this back up, and we're going to go to Develop. I'm going to show you my standard adjustments that I make when I import photos. Your pictures by default, the profile changes to Adobe Standard. And Adobe Standard, to me, looks really drab. The color doesn't really pop. So I like to go in and actually change this to landscape. Let me make one adjustment real quick to the exposure so we can see this a little bit better. So this is standard. So you can see how the color is kind of drab, it falls a little flat. If you just change that to landscape, it makes a big difference. You can also, depending on the image, you might want some of these other ones, but for me, landscape, the colors have the most pop to them, and it just looks the best for my style of shooting. This is something that people miss, though, because it's at the very bottom of all these panels. It's buried in camera calibration, and it's automatically defaulting to, I think, maybe the worst setting of all those. So change that to camera landscape, and you can do this for all your images on import. And we can even, what I like to do is raise the saturation on the blues. And if you guys look primarily at the sky, if we go before and after, you can see how we're really bringing out the blues in the sky. I don't want to take this too high because it also affects the skin just a little bit. So maybe like 20 on the blue with that saturation. It doesn't affect the skin tone too much. Let me get back to the slide real quick. It doesn't affect the skin tone too much. And then I'll use the red slider. If you guys want to snap a picture of this, just so you have these to remember. Okay, ADD and not having an audience is kind of difficult to manage. So anyway, I'll adjust my blues. I like to go up 20 on the saturation. And then on my red primaries, I like to take that down like 8 or 9. And what that's going to do is lower the redness in the skin, and it doesn't really have a negative effect on the skin. It just gets rid of some of that red, which is kind of hard to remove in Lightroom. And I'd said before, we want to make small adjustments to our images because big adjustments are going to make negative changes. If I take this redness down a lot, we're going to start to see her look a little weird. Okay, it's about making small changes where we can, and then those add up in the end. I also like to take my red hues over just a little bit to the right, so they're a little bit more orange than red. Okay, getting some requests to speak louder. I'm going to bring this microphone in. How's this? Sound good? Okay, and I'll slow down some. Okay, so right here is where we're at. In case you weren't seeing the mouse, I'll go a little bit slower with that. So I like to adjust the reds right here and take that red slider a little more towards the orange. I'd rather the skin tones were more orange than red. Okay, so these are my settings here. If you have the process set to 2010 on your image, you'll want to change that to 2012, which is the current process, because if you don't have that, we're going to have a little bit of an issue later on because you won't have as many options to choose from. And also this camera landscape on the 2010 is going to look pretty terrible. So once we have that, we can go into either effects. I want to put a vignette on this. I like to work from the bottom up. And let's work on one more image real quick with the same place. So by default, the profile is going to be on standard. And if you need to ever switch anything back to 0, so I'm right here, the saturation is at -63. If I need to make that 0 again, I can just double click on saturation and that'll bring it back. So again, I like to change this as the profile to landscape, and then I'm going to turn down the reds a little bit, and that's going to reduce the reds in her skin. And then I like to bump up the blues. Okay, and if you want to change these around, you can. Some of these are going to look better in different modes, but you'd be surprised how much of your coloring you can do right here in this bottom panel. Portrait never looks good though. Don't use portrait. So here's landscape. I think I'm actually going to go with camera standard for this one. And then if you want to put a vignette on an image, you jump back to this one. I like to go to lens corrections and then post-crop vignettings. It's under effects. We don't want a cream vignette. But if you take it to the left, it's going to start to darken down the edges. And I'm actually going to adjust this midpoint and the feather so you guys can really see exactly where this thing is at. Okay, so the amount is how much it's going to bring it in towards the center, how much darker it's going to be. The midpoint is going to bring it closer towards the center. Okay, so if we turn this amount down, and I'm trying to go slow with this mouse, but it's clicking all over the place. And roundness is going to adjust this edge of this. So right now I'm going to darken it back down. I like to have it about here, so negative 30-ish on the amount, and you can adjust this per image if you want, but I like to have a basic setting for it, and in 1 second we're going to actually make a preset for these things so you can apply these on import when you bring in your pictures. So those are the two things that I always like to change on my images. So I'm going to go over here to presets in the top left and click create new preset, and I'm going to check none, and I'm just going to click these two things, process version, calibration, and actually also lens vignetting right here. Okay, if you don't want the lens or the vignette, then you don't have to select that. I just like to put it on my images. So we'll name this import preset, create, and then the next time you go in and import your pictures, it'll say on import you can select that preset from your user presets, and then you can actually import it with this, and you won't have to deal with this again. Okay, so now we're ready to start actually making some adjustments. The first thing we're going to want to adjust is right here at the top, and that's your white balance. This is really simple and self-explanatory. And your tint as well. So if you ever notice a picture has some pink or some green tints to it, that'll come into play here, and we'll get into that in a second. Exposure is also really simple. You just get that exactly you want. Again, this is self-explanatory and basic, guys, but we're going to move into some better stuff here in 1 second. So, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. This is something that a lot of people overlook, but I think can really benefit your images. It's all about finding balance. When we're editing, we're trying to balance out the image. We're trying to balance out the lights and the darks. There's always exceptions to every rule, but for the most part, that's what we're trying to do, because then as you apply presets later on in your workflow, you're not going to have to worry about darks becoming darker and brights becoming brighter because we balance it out. So I'm going to adjust my shadows first because I'm analyzing the image. As I said a second ago, you always want to analyze your images and figure out what's wrong with them. Right now the grass is too dark, and that falls into shadow. So I have two ways to control those shadows. I have shadows right here and blacks. And the difference in these two is that shadows is going to raise all those things that are considered shadows. It's going to brighten them up. And blacks is going to bring up the black point in the image. So anything that's black is just going to be raised up to be brighter. So you can use a combination of the two, but I really like to focus mainly on the shadow slider. Highlights does the same thing. If we want to brighten or darken the sky, maybe her face is a little too bright if we go to 0 right here. So I'm going to use my highlights to actually darken down her face in the sky a little bit. Okay, so that image is pretty balanced right there. We can jump down here to vibrance and saturation. This is also something, I apologize, I should have added this into our import, so hopefully you're not following along. But if we come here to vibrance, we can turn this up, and you can see that it really brightens up and enhances a lot of the color and a lot of the tone. So what it does is it actually looks at what's saturated in the image, and it tries to leave that alone, and it looks at what it isn't saturated, and it saturates it. So here's without vibrance at 0, and as we raise that, you can see the colors start to come in. Am I doing better on the speed here, guys? Can I get some feedback? I don't have any, I can't see anybody's comments, so Andy, if you could send me any info. So I like to put this around 20. And clarity, what it's doing is applying like a local contrast. It's applying more to the edge of things. So it's going to make your images look, Andy says, I'm doing better. Getting that from multiple attendees. So thank you guys. I need the support over here. I've been locked away in my office working 14-hour days for a couple weeks now, and I only see my wife and my cat and my employee, and now it's ironic because I'm talking to all of you and I can't see you or hear you. but you are beautiful that way. So going back to clarity though, I like to put that at 20 as well. So I have my clarity and my vibrance at 20. I really don't mess much with the saturation, because as you can see, if we change that some, it starts to look fake. Vibrance really adds saturation, but saturation itself just looks almost cartoony. So I try to stay away from that. So if you want, now we could go over here and hit, let me do this slower, come over to presets, click this little plus here to make a new preset. And I still have these things that I picked before, but now I'm also going to add clarity and vibrance. And I'll just make this import preset 2. Okay, let's hop over to a different image, and let's talk about some brushes. If you come up here at the top right of your screen, you'll see this icon right here. It kind of looks like a brush and a slider mixed together. You can also press K to get to that, that brush. By the way, these hotkeys over here, we made these up yesterday, and I'll be sending you guys a link to pick these up so you can use these while you're editing. So go to Adjustment Brushes. The hotkey is K. That'll save you some time. And as I said before, the first thing we want to do is balance out our images. Now when I took this shot, I had to make a choice. Did I want to blow out her dress completely and lose the highlights, or did I want to, and by doing so I would properly expose for her skin, or do I try to shoot for somewhere in the middle, preserve the highlights in the dress, and therefore make her a little bit underexposed? I chose to preserve the dress because I know I can always brighten something back up, but if you blow out the highlights, you can't bring them back. So you want to try to find that balance point, and now that we're in our brushes, we can start to balance out this image with our brushes. So right here, you see Effect. If you click on that, next to that, you're going to see all these options. You won't see all this stuff. This is something secret I've been working on, but you will see these other options, and right now I'm going to select Exposure, because the first thing you're going to do when you balance out a picture is balance the exposure. You'll also notice the size of my brush is getting bigger and smaller, and how I'm doing that is I'm hitting the bracket keys right here. Okay? So by default, if you press that exposure brush, it's going to go to +1 or 1 right here. And we can just start by painting that on, and immediately I see that's just entirely too bright. Okay, so you have a couple options. Let me reset this brush. You can either turn down the exposure here, which is what I recommend doing, or you can change your density. Now, density affects how it's the maximum amount that brush can be applied. Okay, the flow is how much is applied per stroke. So if I have my flow really low, you'll notice not much is changing when I paint right here. Okay, if I turn my flow up to 100, you'll see it really changes. So if you're ever working with a brush and you're wondering why it's not showing up, check your flow and check your density. Those are the two things that may be wrong. I like to have my flow at about 90 and my density at 100. Maybe, yeah, we'll go 100. So I'm going to take this and start painting over her skin and over the parts of the image that are dark. One other really important thing to note is that my feather on the brush is at 100. And if you look at my brush here, let me get it stationary, you can see that circle with another circle around it. So that inner circle is where your density is at its maximum. And as it goes out from that, it's going to gradient to 0. Okay, so that's your feather. That area from between the small circle and the big circle is your feather. So if we increase the feather or we decrease the feather, you're going to see at 0 we have no feather at all. And then if we go up to 100, it's less noticeable where we feather. That's really important. You don't want to leave a line. You don't want to leave any kind of trace that you have actually edited an image. It just needs to look perfect. So I'm going to delete that and start over here. Paint this. You can be kind of sloppy. I'm having to be because I think my mouse batteries are dying. And I'm painting the background here. And you'll notice like this part back here is still dark. But I have the exposure on her the way I want it. And if you need to see where you've painted, you can actually press O. And it's going to show you an overlay. Okay, right here, show overlay. And if you've ever wanted to change that annoying color that's on there, you can press Shift plus O, and you can cycle through some different options. We'll just stick with red, though. Right now I don't need to see it because I don't need to be detailed. But there's times when you're going to be really detailed in what you're doing, and you're going to want to see where you've painted. So I'm also going to brighten up the truck a little bit. Really, the only thing I'm leaving exactly the same is the dress. But the reason I'm brightening instead of darkening is, again, if I would have exposed properly, if I would have exposed like this, I almost said her breasts, her dress would have been overexposed. And this way, we can preserve those highlights in the dress and just brighten everything around it. Now, I want to go over the background one more time because I want to bring out some of the green in the shot. And if I click right here, you can see our difference so far. So if I want to create a new brush, I need to click New. Anytime you're creating a new brush, you have to click New, or else it's going to adjust the brush that you're working on, and it's going to make changes to that. So let's say I went from exposure, and then I changed this to temperature. It's going to change that brush I was just working on. Okay. By the way, if you need to undo something, it's Command-Z or Control-Z on a PC. I'm on a Mac, and I'm also using Lightroom 5. I forgot to mention that from the top. So here we go. We've got that more balanced now, and then from there, if you need to close this, you can click right here, and then we can go back and make adjustments to our exposure, which we could have done from the start. I was jumping between images. This isn't teaching a bunch of people online, isn't my normal workflow when I'm sitting here at my desk. But I can adjust these highlights to bring back some more. You can see how this adjusts the dress, and it really doesn't affect too much else. Those highlights are only going to affect the things that are brightest in the image. So we can bring back some of the details in the dress. We can bump up the shadows a little bit. That's going to brighten up the background. Now, one thing I do want to get into a little bit of retouching right now. I'm going to zoom in. I don't really want to be this zoomed in, but one thing that's really hard to do, even with a reflector, you can see this catch light in her eye. That is from the reflector. Almost all the light that's on her is from the reflector. The brightest part of the light's coming straight down. You can see it kind of on her shoulder and on her hair. But sometimes, if you're shooting a wide shot like this, it's hard to get enough light into the eyes. So right here you can see it's just a little bit darker in this area around her eye and over here than it is her forehead, and I'd really like to kind of brighten that up. So again, I'm going to go Exposure, I'm going to click New, and I'm just going to go, I'm kind of just taking a guess, I'm going to go 40 or 0.4. And if you paint that in and you notice it's too bright, which my mouse just jumped again, sorry. If you paint that in and you notice it's too bright, all you have to do is come back over here and you can turn down the exposure so you can see how we can adjust just that one spot. So I'm going to get that to where it's balanced with the rest of her face, maybe just a little bit on her cheek here. And if you notice here too, that might be just a little bit too bright right there. So I'm actually just going to undo that last brush stroke. If we turn the density down to 50, now when we paint that on, it's not going to go on as strong. Okay, so that lets us make changes to our brush density as we're going through this. So again, I want to lighten up her cheek just a little bit. I'm going to turn my density down over here, and now I'm just going to kind of fill in these areas that are a little bit darker. So right here, kind of the smile line is a little bit darker. Anything that's a shadow that I just want to kind of balance out on her face. Okay, I'm going to hit New, and now I'm going to work just a little bit on her neck really quick. This is really funny. If Alicia, if you're watching this, this girl worked for me. She's my first employee. So, making her look as beautiful as she deserves. There we go. So I'm just going to turn this down a little bit. And if you come in here, this left eye is a little bright. I'm going to turn that down just a hair as well. Okay? So, we hit done, and let's compare the before and after of what we've done here so far. So we went in, we changed the camera profile, we changed our exposure just a little bit, and we changed the highlights and shadows, and the rest was really done with our brushes, just this adjustment brush up here. Okay, so I see a lot of people, and I remember when I started out too, I saw all these professional photographers, and I would email them, and I would go, what kind of camera do you use? I don't even understand how you're getting such good pictures. And they'd always message me back, it's not the camera. I'm like, I know it's the camera, man. You're not fooling me. But the truth is, if you take the time to get the shot right in camera, it doesn't really matter what camera you have. But the thing that really separates the men from the boys, so to speak, is this polishing in Lightroom or in Photoshop. It's making that image from this image, which is a pretty good, pretty good shot in camera. It's the best I could really do without having some like ridiculous equipment with me, but I can polish it into this image and have a really sellable image. Okay, and that's before any presets or anything like that. I'd probably go back through and darken down her face just a little bit. I was narrating your editing is very odd. So this image here we can actually do a lot more with. So I want to brighten this up first and foremost so I can see what I'm working on. So you can see that I've actually set up a shot. Sometimes you're going to be in situations where you just can't light everything. I had two lights here, one up above them, one coming from behind, but I just didn't have enough light to fill in that background. Okay, so that's my shadows. I'm identifying what's wrong. My shadows are too dark. So I'm going to come over here to the shadows first. I'm going to raise that up and see if I can make any difference. If not, I'm going to jump down to my blacks and start raising that. Okay? So that kind of helps me get where I want to go. So here's our before and after. I'm sorry, I pushed the wrong button there. Okay, and that's just as of right now. That's not a complete before and after. Also want to apply that import preset that I made. You can see that kind of pops the colors a little bit. And from here I can brighten and adjust. Now, one thing I'm noticing in this picture is just a little bit crooked. It's not quite square. This line in the background is a little bit off. And actually I want to make this black and white as well. If you ever need to do that, you can just turn the saturation down to 0. That's the fastest way to do it. I'm going to speed up because I've got a lot to talk about. I'll go longer if anybody wants me to. I don't really care. So I'm going to hit R to get to my crop tool, and I'm going to hold Command or Control. On a Mac it's Command, and that's going to bring up this ruler, and that's my straighten tool. And all I'm going to do is drag that across the point that I want to straighten, let go, and it's going to automatically rotate and crop for me. And while I'm in here, if I want to go in and crop this image some, I can. Okay? So let me show you one more with straighten and crop. This is a really cool image from Kevin Hudson. So thank you, Kevin, for letting us borrow it. If you've ever worked with an animal, you know it's really difficult to try and control everything to get that animal to behave, to do what you want. So it can be hard to get the lighting exactly how you want it and to get the pose and everything perfect. So you make do with what you can, and then you go back and fix it in Lightroom. So I'm gonna put that preset on there that we had made. I'm gonna go a little bit faster with our edit on this one. you'll notice there's kind of a green cast to this shot. So if you need to adjust that, come up to tint and go towards magenta. That's going to eliminate a little bit, and then our warmth is also going to have an effect too. So just by changing your white balance and dialing that in, you can get a lot better looking image. Okay, now I'm going to press R to get to my crop tool. I'm going to hold Command. I'm going to drag this across the horizon line. That's going to straighten and crop. If you need to go ahead and crop, all you do is drag in from the edges. There we go. I'm going to get to something a little more exciting right here, guys. And I'm going to show you how to fake a sun flare. So now we're going to go up here to our graduated filter. You can press M to get to that. And what I'm going to do is go to, I'm going to click temperature. Doesn't really matter what brush. Make sure you've hit new. But what I'm going to do is actually turn that temperature up to about 20. I might adjust that in a second. And I'm going to raise my exposure, we'll say to 50 for now. And I'm going to drag this from the top left corner, because what I want to do is kind of recreate this look of a sun flare coming in, warming the shot up. So let's turn this off and back on. And you can see now it kind of gives that effect like we're letting a little bit of the sun into the shot. With this here, you can adjust. This thing works just like your feather does with the brush. From this line, this is our main line, and it's going to feather out to the second line. So you can drag that in as much as you want. If we want to get that in on her, we can also adjust the angle by coming in really close to this little pin and just turning it. Okay? So here's our before and after. So that's a pretty dramatic edit right there in just a few seconds, or maybe a minute. So let me get to another one. Let's do one more like that for practice. This is my little niece, and to get back to that, first off, we're going to apply the preset up, and that time it doesn't look very good. So on occasion, you're going to run a preset like that, and the landscape thing is just going to be a little bit too much. And if that happens, all I need to do is come down and kind of cycle through. Oh, my mouse batteries are going to go. Just cycle through these and find what looks best and what suits your style. So I'm going to go with standard, and I'm going to scroll back up to the top. And right now I'm looking at the shot again. What's wrong? She's a little bit too dark. Her hair's a little bit too dark. This part's a little too dark. So again, we're looking for balance. So that starts with shadows here. I'm going to turn that up, and that actually looks pretty good. And then I'm going to adjust my white balance too. Okay? And then there's a lot more we could do with that, but I just want to hop over here to this gradients. So we can do this one more time. We'll go to temperature. I'm going to show you how to save it this time so you can do it again on your own time. We're going to go to temp. We'll raise that to 21, 25, somewhere in there. And exposure, we go to 37-ish. And I'll just drag this in. You have to kind of think about where the light's coming from, because it needs to be realistic. So the light's coming from above. I'm just going to drag this from the top. Maybe a little bit from that left angle just to brighten up that side. You can see how it just adds that little bit of warmth. You can adjust the temperature as well, so if you want it to be warmer or cooler, or if you want to actually increase the shadows, which makes it look even more like the that flare look. But once you have your settings the way you want them, you'll just click by effects right here, come down to save current settings as new preset, and then just name it sun flare or something like that. And then the next time you'll be able to come in and actually select, you'll be able to select in there. All right, so let's move on. Let's get into some retouching because we're starting to cut it close on time. This image is from Jessica Edwards, so thank you, Jessica, for sending this in. With retouching, there's really two steps, and most people go into Photoshop to do this, but you can actually do a lot of it here in Lightroom. So let's get into that. I apologize for the delay getting to it. My ADD is not helping me out here because I could just sit here and do this stuff all day. But so I've come over here. I'm in my heal, my spot removal tool. You can get to that by pressing Q. And here it's the same thing. You have feather, you have size, and you have opacity. This is going to vary from shot to shot, but I like to have the feather around, I don't know, 75, and we'll probably put the opacity at about 95, but 100 is fine too. And then your size you can adjust with the bracket keys. And I really, really recommend that you guys memorize all the stuff over here, all these hotkeys, because it's just going to save you a tremendous amount of time in Lightroom. But once you have this picked, all you have to do is click on the spots that you want removed, and in Lightroom 5 it automatically picks the best like what it thinks the best candidate is for the skin. So I'm going to go through and do it this way once, and this mouse is jumping all over the place, which makes this very difficult. Okay, this must be thrilling to watch. If you're doing it with automatic mode, you just want to make sure that whatever it's replacing it with doesn't look like really weird. Some of these are going to look strange. If you have to do it a lot, it might start to look repetitive. Okay, so if that happens, if you just have a few, that's going to be your best route. To come up here, press Q, or just click here on this tool, and just use the heel. But I'm going to reset that, and now we're going to use clone. And with clone, it's essentially the same thing. You're just going to pick the spots that you want it to come from, that you want that sample to come from. So you can see it actually changing. We don't want to pick something from here. We just want to pick the most similar bit of skin that's going to blend in and not be noticeable. Okay, so again, heel is the fastest way. I'm just showing this in case your version of Lightroom doesn't have heel. It just has clone. But it still makes selections for you. So now let's go ahead and smooth out this skin. And I've spent so much time doing this skin smoothing stuff because I've been working on our Lightroom Retoucher. So let me just show you what this looks like real quick. So this is a brush I've made. We're going to put our density. You've got to make sure it's at 100%. We're just going to paint this over the skin. I'm going to show you guys how to do this manually here in a second. But you'll just paint this over the skin, and it's going to smooth out all these bumps. If you have like extreme acne to deal with, you're going to still have to use like the clone stamp tool to get rid of some of that stuff. But for the most part, this thing is really awesome for just smoothing out skin tones. Sometimes you need to go over it a second time, or you can switch it over to our strong brush. But if we click this on and off, you see the difference that makes, and you can always make adjustments to that. But for now, we're going to make a brush for you guys. So let me delete that one. And we're going to go to sharpness. You don't really have to pick sharpness. You can pick any of these things. Just reset whatever's there. We're just going to adjust the sharpness on this and turn it down, because essentially what we're doing is kind of blurring the skin. And the way we make it still look like it kind of has pores is by adding some noise, which I know seems weird. What's also weird is that it says noise, and to add noise, you take it down. So think of this as noise reduction. So if you need to reduce the noise, you take it up. And if you want to increase the noise, take it down some. Andy, let me know if I need to shut up and move on to something else. But I'm going to do this for at least 5 more minutes. They can't stop me. And I'm also going to change the clarity, because that's going to make less contrast in those areas that have blemishes. So I'm going to put this maybe at 50. I'm going to go ahead and turn my flow all the way up. And you can just start painting this over the skin. 1 second. We had a mouse malfunction. No complaints from the attendees, so keep going until your mouse dies. All right, kids. I will. Which could be any minute, because it's like sabotaging me more and more. But Right now I'm just painting this over the skin, and once again, if you press O, you can see where you've painted. So let me do this a different way. Let me be really drastic with this. I want to paint this over her whole face because we have to preserve precious mouse time. And I told my employee to stay home today because I didn't want to too much to be able to hear him in the background. And he's the only person I have to run and get batteries. I think it can run on willpower though. Okay, so I painted this over the entire thing. Now, real quick, auto mask, if you've ever wondered what that does, that's going to make it harder for you to paint over parts that Lightroom feels don't need to be painted over. It's going to mask kind of the eyes and the mouth. I'd recommend just leaving it off and paying attention to what you're doing. So right now I want to take that off of the eyes and off the lips. I'm going to select Erase. So right here by Brush, it says A, B, and Erase. I'm going to select Erase. I'm going to make sure my feather is turned up, my flow is turned up, and I'm going to go over each of these sections that I don't want blurred. So you have to think about what you don't want blurred. What needs to look real? What cannot be blurred? Well, the eyes can't be blurred, and eyelashes can't be blurred. Lips can't really be blurred. Anything that's an important detail needs to be preserved. And if you mess up, we can fix that in a second. Actually, there is a hotkey that I could have given you guys that we wrote down yesterday, that I learned yesterday. You can, once you painted this stuff on, you can actually hold Option or Alt to paint it off. So if I paint this on and I mess up, I can hold Option, I can paint it back off. Okay, so that's nifty. That'll save you some time. Do this on the lips. Cool. So to press or to get rid of this overlay, I'm going to hit O, and you can see that we've smoothed out her skin quite a bit. Now, with what we did, we had to be pretty drastic because there's a lot of shadows. But we just did that in Lightroom, so we didn't have to open that in Photoshop. And if we want to go even more in depth, we can zoom in on her eyes, and I'm going to create a new brush. So again, press K, come up here, click this, whatever you want to do. I want to brighten her eyes, so that all starts with exposure. And you want to be careful not to let this brush creep over into the eyes, because if you start getting like these weird white lines around it, I see people do this a lot, and this is something you really need to pay attention to with your brushes. It's where the end of it is. You need to pay attention to how it feathers, and keep the feathering line on the edge of what you're working with, because I'll show this with a sunset picture in a second, but it's better to have the edge of your subject a little bit darker than have a halo around your subject that's brighter, because if the edge of your subject is darker, then it could just be thought of as a shadow. But if your background's brighter, that has no basis in reality. So you can't do that. So base your editing on reality. And right now I'm still brightening. I'm just looking at the things that are too dark. Another thing we can do to the eyes, if we've just painted over the eyes, or we can create a new brush, which is really what I would always recommend. So up here we'll create a new brush. This time we want to sharpen the eyes. So select Sharpness, come up here, turn that to, I don't know, we'll say 37 for now. The thing with brushes is also that you can paint them on and then worry about the settings afterwards. So if I want to sharpen this up more, I can do it after I've made the change too. I don't want to go to 100, but you can turn up the shadows. There's a lot of stuff you can do. Just get in there and play around. And here's a quick change of what our brushes have done for her skin. And then we probably want to tone this down on the skin a little bit. Let's get to a little bit more like what you're going to be working with skin-wise. So here we have pretty good skin. Still needs to be smoothed out. If you just made that brush like I'd showed you how, then you're good to go. This image says loading, but if not, I'm just going to use this beauty brush because I have my settings already. So again, we'll just paint this over. You want to make sure your density is at 100%. And I guess I really haven't even mentioned much about this beauty brush thing. But I've been working on a Lightroom retouching toolkit for what feels like an eternity now. But I've made all these really cool brushes for retouching the skin, enhancing the eyes, reducing the redness, making the hair look better. There's lip gloss. Let's see. There's all kinds of stuff. Catch lights, eye enhancements. You can even put on eyeshadow. You name it, it's all in here. I spent a ton of time on this, and I'm actually releasing this tomorrow. Only releasing 100 copies because I want to get some user feedback and make sure that I'm always putting out like the best possible product. And right now I feel like, oops, this is why you have to press new brush. That was a teachable moment. So I'm going to press new, then select the thing I want. So I'm going into our Lightroom retouching toolkit, eye enhancer. I'll zoom out a little bit, get to 100%, and hit done, so we can preview this. So you can see her skin is a lot smoother, her eyes really pop, and we did that in like a few seconds. There's a ton of stuff we can do on here, but I don't want this to be a sales pitch. But I do want to let you guys know that that goes on sale tomorrow. I'm only selling 100 copies until like mid-January, and it's normally 89 bucks, and it's going to be just $69 for 3 days only, or when 100 copies sell, whichever comes first. I'm really, really excited about it. I've made a lot of products for photographers. I've taught a lot of workshops. I've done a lot of cool stuff. I really think this is the thing that more people are going to use than anything I've made. So I would really encourage you to check this out. It goes on sale tomorrow at 9 a.m. Central Time. So wherever you're at in the world, please check it out. And let's open this up for questions because I keep rambling. Andy, it's good to hear another human's voice, my friend. I don't even feel like a person when I'm just sitting here alone, talking to nobody. It's so disheartening. And as soon as I heard you, I'm back alive.
To those who are attending, obviously I've been chatting with Brett through the chat function. So that's what's led to this little bit here. So thank you for the great presentation, Brett. Let's get on to
I hope it was good. Good Lord. What a relief.
Pardon me.
Let's get to some questions here.
Pardon me as I collect myself here. Okay. All right, let's start with the question. This one came in right after we started. Currently using Lightroom 2.3. Should I upgrade to Lightroom 5?
Man, I'm going to make it easy on myself and just say yes.
Excellent.
I really would. There's a lot of really great improvements. When I started out with live camera actions, I mentioned before that everybody wanted me to make presets in Lightroom, and I went in and I tried to do it. I had Lightroom 2 at the time, and I was really frustrated with it. I hated the program. I thought it was clunky. They just didn't have enough options, and like in the past year, I've upgraded to Lightroom 4 and 5, and the difference is tremendous. I think it is a lot better. The functionality is a lot better, so I think it's absolutely worth the money to invest in Lightroom 5, and then you can buy my Lightroom retouching toolkit that works with Lightroom 4 and 5. So that's perfect. It's meant to be.
Oh, I didn't.
I'm a lot more fun than I just was. I'm sorry if that was boring.
I didn't realize I was giving you a softball like that.
Oh, I can turn it all into a softball, man. It's marketing.
All right, here we go.
The next one I'm doing is on marketing. But
all right, let's keep focus here. Okay, so got a question here from Jake. He says he is forever hearing people say Lightroom is completely unnecessary and Bridge does it all. Would you comment and compare?
Yeah, that's actually a great statement because I've used Bridge from the start. I started out with Bridge, and up until I started using Lightroom, I used Bridge exclusively. But I really just feel like Lightroom is a lot more robust. The preset functionality makes it absolutely worth it. Bridge is just kind of clunky for me, and I'm not using the latest version of Bridge, but I mean, like I said, I've processed over 200,000 images through Bridge, so I'm experienced with it. I'm going Lightroom. I really just feel like it's so much better. It's so much easier. Yeah, there is a little bit of a transitionary phase you have to go through, which I'm still kind of in myself, because you have to learn a little bit different workflow, but I think it is absolutely worth it when you do it. It's a good question. I think if you have Bridge, you could probably just keep rocking Bridge if you don't want to spend the money.
Okay, this one is from Nancy. The question that everybody asks, Canon or Nikon?
I know who this is. Canon, but I don't really care. Like, a camera is a camera. It's not about the camera you're using. It's just about the vision you have as an artist. Like, if you give me a little crappy camera, I'm going to go out and I'm going to get you something out of it, because that's what being an artist is. It's being able to look at the world around you and find the art in it and find the beauty in it. So Canon, Nikon, I mean, come on, Nancy. Let's not worry about that.
And Brett, this is why I kept my mind on mute the whole time.
I know who she is, so I'm giving her crap.
All right, let's see. Okay, question here from Ken. Can you talk a little bit more about brightening and noise?
Sure. Okay, so can you ask Ken if he means like adding brightness and then getting noise, or he just means those two topics?
Let's see.
I will say this, though. I don't really use, well, brightness isn't really even an option here. In other versions of Photoshop, you're going to have that brightness option, but it's not going to be in your main, your basic panel. When you come in here, let's see. Yeah, we're not dealing with brightness there. But one thing I will say, and maybe this is what he was asking, it was when you brighten an image, you actually do enhance the noise that is inherent in the picture. So if you have an image, so let's take this image here. This is actually a perfect example. I don't know if this is your question, but if somebody has this question, it will answer.
He says decreasing shadows.
Decreasing or increasing shadows. If you increase shadows, yeah, you are going to enhance the noise that's there, and you have to decide whether or not you want to make that sacrifice. Do you want the brighter background with some noise, or do you want it to not be visible and be noise-free? And with a black and white image like this one, because if you recall, our original was pretty underexposed, and we brightened it up, and that's going to create some noise. But if you throw it in black and white, you can just call it grain. That's my little secret. If I'm shooting at like 2600 ISO or 26,000 ISO, throw it in black and white, and it's just, well, I did that whole thing in black and white film. Beautiful.
Okay. Question from Charlotte here. She says, when applying, we're talking about softening the skin, does it make the image thicker? Do you feel like it adds weight to the face, or is that just something we're seeing in the process?
Okay, so let's see. Let's bring up another shot with retouching. I don't really. It's going to minimize the shadows a little bit. And the one we did before was really extreme. I probably shouldn't have used that one, but I wanted to showcase the spot removal tool. So I'm going to come back up here. Again, I'm going back to this blur brush, but we went over those settings. And let me zoom in. And let's actually brighten her up just a little bit. So we'll use our exposure brush, and I'm just going to paint this over everything. Now that might be a little bit bright. I'm also brightening up her arm. But right now I'm just kind of I'm adjusting these different areas. Her face is a little too bright, like I said, so I'm going to bring down my exposure just a little bit. And now her arms are still too dark. Okay, so what am I going to do? Hit New with that same brush that we had, and now that allows me to paint a second layer over the image on the parts where I need it. Okay, so there's that. So then now we can get into the smoothing. So once again, I'm going to hit New, and we'll go to that beauty brush, and settings are right here if you want to steal them, I guess. But anyway, we'll paint this over the skin. Also make sure your density and your flow are up either all the way or pretty close. So now we're going to paint this, and hopefully this will answer your question. Now one thing I do see is that her makeup right here has a little bit of a run in it, so that's something I try to address. We might as well just do it, right? Why just say we're going to do it theoretically when we could just do it? So let me turn. I know when Andy has his thing muted that he's laughing. So right here, this was probably a terrible idea. I love getting myself dug in a hole and then not being able to edit my way out of it. So scratch that. This little line, we'll see how it looks after we use this this brush. Okay, how's that? Is that fair? I mean, this was supposed to be like an hour, and I'm going to give you guys so much time. So we have to make sure feathers on there, and then we're going to just start painting it off the skin. Now the way I have mine set up, it gives a little bit of a bump to anything that could be considered a shadow, because that's going to soften those shadows up a little bit. Shadows are what make things look harsh and look not smooth. So I'm going to press O because it's kind of hard to see exactly what's happening because the brush is so fine, but then when you look at the overall thing, you can really see the difference and how much smoother the skin is. So again, you could just go over the whole face and be really crazy with it and then just erase it off, or you can be a little more detailed and just paint it like this. And again, the main two things that are adjusted in this brush for retouching skin are the clarity is turned down, and the sharpness is turned down, and I guess technically the noise is turned down even though we're adding some noise. Okay, so that looks pretty good right there. Excuse me. So if we press O, we can get that back off there. And if we bring up our before and after here, we can see the difference in the skin. So subtle is better for sure. And that's the way I've made all these brushes. But then we can go in and let me show you one more thing with the eyes. Let's get somebody with blue eyes so we can do that. So, and Andy, if you want to, I guess you probably have another question chambered, but I'm going to come in here.
More than one or two.
Okay. Let's go ahead and jump to that question, guys, because I could just keep rambling.
Okay, really good one here. You remember that link you said you were going to give us?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, let me do that. 1 second. I've got 2 windows up, and it is coming down the pipes.
And good one just came in. You've already talked at least one person into upgrading to Lightroom 5. Is there a cheat sheet they can find?
A cheat sheet? In what way?
Christine, anything? Can you expand on that question? And to everyone else, if you'll check your chat window, there should be a link waiting for you.
Yeah, just go to that link, and then you can actually just right-click on the pictures and save it to your computer. There's Mac and PC. And if you scroll down, you can read a little bit more about that Lightroom retouching toolkit there. Product placement.
Okay, Christine clarified, and I actually did have this question from Rhonda as well. Do you have any notes that they could get from this session? Just to clarify, we are recording this, so you will be able to go back and watch this. But Brett, I just wanted to know if you had, a document or anything that we could share.
No, I don't have anything prepared. I figured since it's going to be recorded, that people will be able to refer to that. Hopefully that's good enough for them. I've been busting my butt to do this thing. I'm really sorry. Just come over to my house and I'll edit your pictures. Just kidding.
Okay.
No, I don't. I'm sorry. I don't really have any stuff. I'm not trying to be a smart aleck. There's a ton of resources online that you can find. Really, if you just search anything Lightroom, you're going to find a lot of stuff, and I've looked up some of that stuff myself. These things in here, I guess if you want to take a screen, well, I could actually, let me bring up those presets, that import preset we made, so people can maybe copy these settings while we're chatting here. And is there any way I can upload anything for people to download right here? Let me just take a picture of this. If you guys want to take a screenshot of this part right here, you'll have these effects to go back to, which are my standard effects. So to do that on the Mac, it's Shift-Command-4. To do that on a PC, I'm going to roll the dice and say maybe Shift-Control-4. But
Just the print screen button.
well, there you go. I should have just threw it to you.
Oh, Ken would also like to point out that I let this one slip by, but when you were talking about the black and white in the barn, he said it's a barn. We expect some grain there.
Yeah, exactly. That's perfect. Yeah, thank you, Kim. I will steal that joke next time I edit this image for people.
Okay,
So thank you.
An actual question here for some product placement again.
Well, there we go. That's perfect.
The first 100 people to get the actions, basically your beta testers, will they have an option to get a more polished version later on?
That's a perfect question, and I'm glad you guys asked me that. Yeah, so the beta testers, the version that I have right now, I think is the best that I can possibly make it. I want to get it out to people and see what they have to say, see if they think it can be improved, and then see if it actually can be improved based on like the limitations of Lightroom. But for me, I really love it. I've been using it in my own workflow. I've been using it on a lot of different photographers' pictures to beta test it. So I'm throwing it out to 100 people. Those people will give me some feedback, and then in January I'm going to release the full version, and the first 100 people that buy it will get that free, and I'm probably going to include a little extra something just as a thank you for those people trying it out. So yeah, everything I do, I try to take care of people. That's why I'm on here longer than I need to be, and I'll stay on here as long as you guys want me to stay on here. So I'm always trying to just put out the best thing I can for photographers, and that's really my only goal.
Well, as of right now, in my queue, I have a thank you from Paul, who's been using your actions since you released them for Photoshop. And from
Is it Paul Finkelstein?
It is not.
Oh, well, crap. Now I've made Paul feel bad because I just didn't get him. What's Paul's last name? Well, you probably don't want to say Paul's last name. Paul, thank you. You're awesome. I appreciate it.
And then Misty basically says the same thing. She's looking forward to playing with the new toolkit, so we've got you at least one beta tester.
Awesome. Is it what? Well, does your last name start with a W?
It does not.
Crap, man, I suck today. Okay, well, Nancy Poole, I know that was you earlier, but awesome. I'm really excited. I'm also pretty much cabin fever, and I understand why Van Gogh cut his ear off, because I've just been alone with my cat making retouching stuff. So I hope people enjoy it. Next question.
Do you always use the lens correction feature?
Not always. I mean, you could, and I'm just doing post-crop vignetting there, so it's not really, oh, this right here, I'm sorry. No, I don't. I don't even have anything on there. On occasion, I will, like if you need to adjust an image based on the lens. Let me see if I have one that would apply. Oh, I want to, okay. Well, Andy, this has nothing to do. It was just asked, but it's pretty cool. So this shot here, okay, we're jumping a little bit, but I wanted to show this, and I forgot to get to it. This shot here, the sky has some blue tone to it, but it's pretty washed out. So there's actually an adjustment you can make to that. If you come to color, let's actually go to HSL, that's hue, saturation, luminance. If we go to luminance, we can actually turn down the blues, and you can see how that actually adjusts the skies, and it doesn't affect their skin. So unless you're photographing Smurfs, the blues are only going to affect the blues in the shot. So here, it's only the sky, so we can go from here to there and get this really dramatic sky without affecting anything else. Same goes for the grass. It's green. Turn up the greens. It's also kind of yellow, even though it doesn't look it, and you can turn up the yellows. One other quick suggestion here, if you change the greens or the yellows, you kind of need to move both of them. If you change the blues, you also kind of need to change the aquas a little bit. And think of these lines here as like your feathering. So that way it's not going abruptly from one setting to the next. It's got a gradient over. Also, you can change people's ties if they're purple. Okay, next question. Sorry I didn't even answer that. I don't really use that setting very much to actually answer your question. This thing was just, this panel was open. It wasn't my intention.
Okay, so I'm going to give one last chance for questions, and then we have a request. And this is good enough that I've got to put it in here.
Okay, I have a feeling, but go ahead. Questions, come on guys. There's got to be one. You can ask it about business too, photography, I don't care, anything. I'm an open book. I guess I could try to do something entertaining while we're sitting here.
See, this is about normally the time where I go going once.
Yeah, going twice.
Oh, we have a new bidder. What about tone curve?
Tone curve. Well, tone curve is kind of complicated. I do want to show you guys how to do. Can somebody remind me if I showed how to do a tilt shift effect? Because I don't think I did, and that's something I'd like to show. But let me dive into tone curve just for a second. So tone curve, in its standard channel, it's really not that complicated. I usually get in here and get crazy. But with the channel, just on RGB, the way this works is you see this little histogram back here. And the way a histogram works is if you took every single pixel from this picture, you'd have some that are maybe totally white up here, just a little bit. And then you might have some that are maybe almost black right here and right here. And if you stack those up and you said, over here is black, over here is white, and you put each pixel in its respective little spot, you'd stack it up, and then you can see the weight of this is mostly this tone of green grass right here. So if I'm to come to the histogram and I want to brighten up the grass, I know most of this right here is probably the grass. So if I start to drag this up, we can see the grass start to change. Now you also see some change on their skin. So that's why tone curve can be a little bit tricky, because you typically need to make 2 points. One to either bump the shadows or bring the shadows down, and then one to kind of adjust those highlights. Okay, so I'm bringing down the highlights a little bit, like that. Maybe bump this up a little. And again, what I'm doing with the tone curve when I do decide to use it, which is pretty rare, but it's a good tool. It's a few more clicks than I like to deal with. But what I'm trying to do is balance out this image, so then when I come up here, it's a little bit easier to make these changes. Because again, our entire goal is not to make a lot of changes, a lot of big changes. It's to make a few small changes.
So would you say it was comparable to levels and curves?
Yeah, it's pretty similar. There's not much of a difference. If you click right here on this little button here, it's going to give you something that's a little bit more like levels, and it's going to give you a little more control where you can actually select those spots where you want to make changes. So if you really want to get in here and fine-tune your picture and get that contrast, so let's say we want to get up here in these highlights and tone this down some. You can see, if I go really extreme, you can see the change being made there. I just want to tone it down. And so here's the difference with what actually looks better. See, I just don't really mess with tone curve too much. So I would really have to say stick with up here your contrast, your highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. Because here's with the tone curve. And how many times did I click to even get that result? And without the tone curve, it looks better with just upping the contrast or just raising the shadows a little bit or bringing down the highlights.
Don't forget tilt shift.
Tilt shift. So let's do that on, let's see. We'll just stick with the same shot. So to do the tilt shift thing, we're going to come up here to our gradient filter, just like we did before when we created this sun flare effect. So actually I have a brush for that too, but we won't even use it. So I'm just kind of making some adjustments here. Again, if you need to reset this brush, you can just press reset down here, or not right now. Thank you, guys. There we go. Let's just go temp. So I'm going to warm that up. I'm going to bring exposure up, and now I'm going to enhance this sun flare look. Oh, the mouse is going wild. Okay. There's that. And then to do the Now I did that first because I want to show you that you have to press New again or you're going to have another issue. You have to press New each time you make a new one of these things I'm showing you. So let's reset all these things. The only thing we're going to change is the sharpness. Let's take it down to, let's say, 88-ish. It doesn't matter, 70 to 80, somewhere in there. And we're actually going to turn the noise up, which again lowers the noise and makes it a little more blurry. And I'm going to lower the clarity just a little bit too. And now I can drag this over from the edges, and it's going to blur these edges. And you can just keep stacking them on top of that. You can drag out where they start. You can drag out this feather. If you come to this part here, you can see how we're changing that feather. So it's going to go from being drastic up to this point and then changing really quickly here. And I want it to have a little bit more of a feather to it so it's not such a drastic shift. And then we'll do this over here, and I'll show you before and after. And there's one other change I want to make to this image too. But so come back up here, and this is just the difference with the gradients before and after, and you can see that blur effect on the edges and how it brings in that sun flare that we created. So before, actually we could also do side-by-side comparison, which is going to be a little bit easier in case your computer's going slow. Okay, so you can see that blur here. If you can't afford a tilt-shift lens or you just don't want to deal with it in the moment, this is as close to recreating it in Lightroom as you can get. Okay. One other thing I did want to point out really quickly is that sometimes with a reflector you have to be far enough away that you can't reflect light onto the entire subject. That's why her legs look really pale and cool compared to her face. To fix that, we're going to go to our brushes, press K is the hotkey, temp, raise the temp, and then we're just going to paint this over the areas we need to warm up. And if it's too warm, just ride it out. Don't worry about it, because in a second we'll turn down that temperature and we're going to get it balanced with her skin tone. Maybe turn down the pink a little bit. Okay, so here's before and after there. Again, all this is just about balance, guys. Next question, any more?
We have two questions, then we have a request. Okay, first question should hopefully be a quick one. Do you use auto white balance when you shoot in the camera?
It kind of depends. I prefer to set a manual white balance because when you get into the editing, if you're nailing that white balance, your life becomes a lot easier to make adjustments, and if you don't have to change the white balance. Again, the best quality image you put in, the more things you nail when you take that image, the better quality image you're going to have in the end. So I would recommend setting a white balance to use, and I usually do that in Kelvin. So I'll bring up if you have a camera that has a live view on it, you can bring that live view up on the back of the camera and hit your white balance button and go down to Kelvin, and then you can just scroll through and see what it's going to look like warmer and cooler. You can set it that way, or you can shoot auto. I mean, auto for Canon at least, I can't say for Nikon because I don't know, but for Canon anymore, the auto white balance is pretty good. But I feel like it's going to, if you're in a studio setting or a very controlled environment or you're shooting flash and things aren't changing, you're probably better off using a manual point or a manual white balance just to save you time in the end. I think that's where a lot of people slip up with photography, is they're trying to save time in the camera, like in the short term. They're taking a lot of pictures because it's faster to just take pictures, take pictures, take pictures. I want to get started, so I'm just going to go out and start shooting. But you need to just take your time and craft those images, and then when you get to Lightroom, you know, it's more fun to shoot than it is to edit. So you want to spend your time shooting properly so you don't have to edit as much. And it feels really rewarding to nail a picture in camera. I mean, these are just some of mine. I mean, they're nothing special, but these are straight out of camera. I haven't even edited these images. So when it comes to being in Lightroom, it's just kind of fun because all I'm doing is making some little adjustments, brightening things here and there, as opposed to, you know, an image where you really miss the mark and you've got to go in and spend, you know, 5 minutes trying to make it into something.
Okay, last question. Do you create a new catalog for each client?
I personally don't, and I'm not, as far as workflow in Lightroom goes, I'm not the guy to go to, because I hand a card to a kid and he uploads it and then I edit them. So I just upload them into the catalog that there is, and I wish I had a better answer for you. I was trying to beef up on some of my workflow knowledge last night, but that's one thing that I don't really know a great answer to.
Okay, and now for the request. We have a request that you sing us out today.
Okay, I can probably do that.
Okay, let me get my little closing spiel in here, and then I will leave it up to you. Thank you, everyone, for your great questions and that request. Thank you, Brett, for taking the time to present today and for sticking around with us. And thank you to everybody who joined us today. Just a reminder, we will be placing this recording on the PhotoBiz YouTube channel at youtube.com/PhotoBiz. Also, be sure to check out our blog and watch your emails for updates about future webinars. The next webinar will be the 80-20 rule presented by Andy R., which happens to be me, on Thursday, December 19th. Thank you again, Brett, and this concludes today's episode of PhotoBiz Live. Please enjoy as Brett Jarnagin plays us out.
Okay, now despite the fact that I have two guitars sitting in my office, I really wasn't planning on playing a song. So I'm just going to play like a little bit of it, and then Andy can just drop us whenever. Fade to black, if you will. All along there was a fever, a cold, sweaty, hot-headed believer. I threw my hands in the air and said, show me something. She said, if you dare, come a little bit closer, darling. Round and around and around and around we go. Oh, now tell me now, tell me now, tell me now, you know. Not really sure how to feel about it. Yeah, there's something.